Let me start with a question to all of you. Which country do you think is growing faster, China or Poland? Raise your hand if you think it's China. Okay, how about Poland? Okay. I've spent the last 3 years looking at 149 countries using 50,000 data points. And based on this research, it's actually Poland that is growing faster. And I'm going to explain why. I work with government leaders to improve their countries and their cities. And about 3 years ago, these leaders asked for a better way to measure progress, something other than GDP growth. GDP, or gross domestic product, has been used since 1934 as a measure of national income. It includes such things as the production of motor oil or the export of a machine. But many believe, as I do too, that GDP growth is not the best measure of progress because it doesn't include many of the things that are most important to all of us, like the freedom to speak your mind without fear of prosecution, or to let your kids go out and play without putting on a mask, or the feeling of empowerment because you're well educated, or the confidence that the police are on your side and not the bad guys. So together with my team, we developed a new way to measure progress, something more reflective of the 21st century, and we call it the Sustainable Economic Development Assessment, or SEDA. And what SEDA measures is well-being. But how exactly do you measure well-being? What are the things that really matter in our lives that all put together make up well-being? So we did a lot of research, and we spoke to many people about what really mattered to them. And this resulted in 10 dimensions of well-being across 3 categories. Economics, including income, economic stability, and employment. Investments, including health, education, and infrastructure. And sustainability, both social sustainability, including income equality, governance, and civil society, as well as the environment. We then undertook the massive task to collect all of the data required to measure these dimensions. And when done, we measured well-being along 2 time horizons, where each country is today, as well as the trajectory that they're on. Are their leaders spending their time and political capital on the things that really matter? Here you see our 149 countries. Those at the top, like Norway, are doing well at overall well-being, all 10 dimensions combined. They're here for a range of reasons, but one thing they have in common is better scores in governance. But let's look at much of the Western developed world. Like France, they're on the upper left, which means while good, they're improving more slowly than the others. And many economists would tell you that less developed countries should be catching up. And so we actually expected this. There's another set of countries that are newer entrants to the good well-being club, having made strong recent progress and now overall good well-being. Countries like Singapore, Korea, and Poland. And let's look at China, way to the right, one of the best countries at improving well-being. One of the things that surprised me was how few countries with current low levels of well-being are making stronger progress. There are a few, like Ethiopia and Rwanda, but not many. Instead, we see a lot of countries like Egypt and Pakistan with already low levels of well-being and falling further behind. And to me, this is very concerning. So we analyzed the data to see what these countries were missing, and it became clear. The single biggest gap among our 10 dimensions between these countries and the rest of the world is in education. And their leaders can address this. And this is what's most powerful about SEDA. It's not a simple model that just gives a ranking, but it can help us to identify what's missing. It can help us to learn from the best. So how do we do this? Let's look at sustainability. Sustainability consists of social sustainability, for example, income and gender equality, press freedom, and absence of corruption, as well as environmental sustainability, for example, air quality. When you just look at sustainability, the world looks very different. I was very disturbed by this pattern. Countries already doing well are making further progress, and countries doing poorly are falling further behind. Why is this? Maybe it's because sustainability is the most difficult to change. You can't just spend money on it. It's not like building a bridge. Improving sustainability involves changing values and spending political capital. And this requires a long-term commitment and real leadership, like when F.W. de Klerk ended apartheid in South Africa. What about GDP, you may ask? I don't suggest we ignore GDP. In fact, if we correlate GDP growth with improvements in well-being, we can measure how well each country translates its GDP growth into improved well-being. The dots on the line are countries where their improvements in well-being would be expected given their GDP growth. An interesting comparison is Germany and the United States. Both growing GDP the same, but Germany making better improvements in well-being. And they're doing this through great improvements in the environment and in employment. And the USA is falling back in areas like infrastructure. Earlier, I asked you about China and Poland. China's growing its GDP the fastest, and we see that it's improving well-being very well. But actually, it's right on the line, which means it's average at translating GDP growth into improved well-being. So it doesn't stand out anymore. Who does stand out? You guessed it, Poland. Poland is, in fact, the best at converting its GDP growth into improved well-being, and indeed, by our new measure, is growing faster than China. So how does Poland do it? First off, by focusing its attention on well-being. In 2011, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated, "All the efforts of our government must be focused primarily on the safety and well-being of each individual Pole," as he discussed a comprehensive program to improve well-being. It included many of our 10 dimensions. I'll focus on governance. In 2007, Poland had established the Central Anti-Corruption Office. And this office took its job so seriously, it actually prosecuted the deputy prime minister in the very coalition government that had set it up. This eventually led to the collapse of that government. And they accepted this. And maybe this illustrates why Poland has improved its governance score more than any other country over the last 7 years. We've seen the world looks very different when you use well-being as a growth measure rather than GDP. And I'm encouraged to say that Poland is not alone. Other leaders have also made well-being a priority. In 2003, Brazil's President Lula da Silva declared that civil society would be the center of his economic development strategy. And he launched Bolsa Familia, a program to improve income equality, health, and education for 50 million of the mostly rural poor. This program more than halved extreme poverty, as well as children out of school, and it cost less than 0.5% of GDP. In 2004, Morocco's King Mohammed declared that addressing disenfranchisement would be a principal driver of his policies. One area he focused on was gender equality, and he created the new Mudawana, or family code, one of the most progressive laws on women's and family rights in the Arab world. Among other things, the Mudawana grants equal rights in marriage as well as access to property upon divorce. It also promotes women's roles in politics and society, and now 17% of Morocco's parliamentarian seats are occupied by women, up from just 1% 15 years ago. Poland, Brazil, and Morocco, in different continents, in different stages of development and with varying political systems. But they have two things in common. First, their leaders publicly declared well-being as a goal. And second, they enacted specific policies to meet that goal. And as a result, all three countries are in the top quintile in translating their GDP growth into improved well-being, which is at the end of the day what really matters in people's lives. I have lived and worked in many of the countries that we've talked about today, some doing well at SETA and others not. And I have felt the difference. And it's so much more than a country's wealth. It has to do with putting the emphasis on things that matter to people. And we should encourage our leaders to do this, because we already do. When we walk into a voting booth, GDP is the last thing on our mind. And we should tell our leaders this doesn't involve a lot of money, just a clear vision and strong leadership. I believe if our leaders were measured on well-being improvements rather than GDP growth, the world would be a better place. Thank you.